As I said before Mass, the theme today is renewing our hearts, and I want to start with two stories as opposite starting points of the approach from the heart. So the first story is years ago I was talking to a friend late night, very deep conversation, and it caught me by surprise. He suddenly said, I wish I weren't having sex with my girlfriend. And of course, I never forgot those words. So honest, so against what so much of fallen human nature would want. But it came right from his heart. Very deep desire. So that's the first story, the opposite starting point. One time, a father comes to me. He tells me that his son is caught at school committing a sexual act. And, the father's teary-eyed. And he says, you know what really gets me? He's crying and all this. But what bugs me is I don't know if he's upset because what he knows what he did was wrong or because he got caught. And so what the father is pointing out is there is something wrong with his son's heart because his son didn't have a clear sense of right and wrong. We all want a pure heart, and we all in some way want to overcome our sins. And the first reading today talks about God writing his law on the heart. And today I'm not just talking about sexual sins, though St. John Paul II says sexuality, of course, it touches the innermost being of the human person. I'm just talking about the desire that we have in our heart to stop being slothful, to stop lying, stop fighting with our family, stop swearing, etc. So last week, fourth Sunday of Lent, we had this reprieve, if you will. Have mercy on yourself because God does. But now, fifth Sunday of Lent today, we're back in the wilderness, got to face those demons. So today when we talk about this matter of the heart, it's going to be sobering. I think actually it's going to be even more beautiful. So let's give the historical context for the first reading. The context is this. In Moses' time, Moses lives around 1400 BC. In his time, God makes a covenant with his people, and you have to remember that the covenant is the making of a family. You make a covenant in marriage, you make a covenant in adoption. So God made a covenant with the people, and part of that covenant was the 10 Commandments. That would be the guide for how his people should live. But the people keep on breaking this covenant, and this goes on for centuries. So 900 years pass, and God's always trying to rebuild the covenant with his people because they keep on breaking it. And then we get to today's first reading, Prophet Jeremiah. And it says, God says, "The days are surely coming when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah." So the covenant is the family bond. So what God is doing is he's rebuilding his people. And you just have to know, Israel is a northern tribe. Judah is the southern tribe. They used to be one. They had been separated for centuries. And now God's doing this deep family restoration. It goes on. "It will not be like the covenant that I made with their fathers, Moses, when I took them out of the land of Egypt, a covenant that they broke, though I was their husband." Okay, so this is the clearest teaching that God is married to his people. And so if God is married to us, that means the law that he gives us is not just a law imposed by some distant God who doesn't care about us. It's the law of a marriage relationship. There are three characteristics of this new covenant. One, I will put my law within them, and I will write it on their hearts, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. Two, no longer shall they teach one another or say to each other, know the Lord, for they shall all know me, from the least of them to the greatest. And three, for I will forgive their iniquity and remember their sin no more. Okay, so three characteristics of the new covenant. Here's the first characteristic. So God says that he's going to write his law on our heart. Now that's important because you remember where the 10 Commandments were written? It says that they were written on 2 tablets of stone. External, now God's saying he's writing it on our hearts. Christopher West, the very good moral theologian, he says, have you ever noticed that no one ever complains about the fifth commandment, thou shalt not kill? Because in our society, everyone knows it's already written on the heart, murder is wrong, so we don't need to be reminded of it. But the eighth commandment, for example, don't lie. We need to hear that commandment over and over again because it's not yet written on our heart. We don't yet really know how destructive lying is. So this is the heart of the matter, pun intended, this idea of God writing it on the heart. So go back to the first story I told you, my friend. There is something on his heart. He says, yeah, I wish I weren't having sex with my girlfriend. Now, the law was on his heart. He kept on breaking it, but it was there. And that's really beautiful. I told you at least once about this movie called The Mission. It's about a slave trader in 18th century South America who becomes a priest. And there's this wonderful scene when he's with the native people whom he used to enslave. But now he's with them and he's taking part in their life. And the whole tribe is doing this hunt. They're hunting this little animal through the forest. And eventually they capture the animal. And they surround it. And this little boy who's taking part, he tugs on the priest's sleeve. His name is Mendoza. He tugs on Mendoza's sleeve. And they hand him a spear and they say, you do the finish of the hunt. You kill the animal. And Mendoza, as he's getting pulled, he just shakes his head and he says, and it's such a powerful scene because what he was expressing is on his heart now, he doesn't want to kill anymore. For so much of his life, he had killed, but now there's something different. And that is the key. It's not so much, when we talk about overcoming our sins, it's not so much that we're afraid of God's punishments, although that's very good. But when there's a renewal of the heart, it's now, I don't want this anymore. You start shaking your head. And you start saying about all those sins that you're doing, I don't want that anymore. Choose whatever sin you keep on doing. And you don't want that anymore in your life. Second characteristic of the new covenant is that people will have an experiential knowledge of God. Okay, so it says, they shall all know me. Now, everyone knows, do we have that? They shall all know me? There it is. Everyone knows Queen of England, right? But when we say, I know the Queen of England, it means I know about her. I don't actually know her. She actually doesn't know me. I should be more correct. She doesn't have the honor of knowing me. Now, all of us, you know certain people in your life. You remember the time you've met them, and you actually can describe how they treat you. Can you do the same thing with Jesus? Can you describe the time you met him? Can you describe how he treats you, as you do in every other relationship? Because a lot of us can. When we talk about Jesus, we talk like he's really there. Because for us, he is really there. We know he's really there. So if you know what I'm talking about here, about knowing Jesus personally, it's because you know him. Now, if you kind of don't know what I'm talking about, or it's kind of vague, it's possible that you don't know Jesus personally. You can't describe how he treats you, how he loves you, how you love him. Now, here's the beautiful part. Is that Jesus does want to know us. He always wants to. All we have to do is open our heart. And that's why we're always trying to create opportunities here at St. Anthony's so that we can meet Jesus personally. We leave the church open 18 hours a day so that people can come and encounter Jesus in quiet prayer. This is why we're always offering Alpha. Some people wonder, why do you keep on repeating? Why? Because people keep on meeting Jesus at Alpha. They keep on meeting Jesus at faith studies. And we'll never stop offering these ministries as long as they bear fruit, because people meet Jesus personally through them. And the third characteristic of the new covenant, it says, I will forgive their iniquity and remember their sin no more. So Jesus forgives us through the sacraments of baptism, confession, Eucharist. And so please never get discouraged. We keep on falling, but Jesus, part of the new covenant, will always forgive us. So here are 4 ways that God will renew our hearts. And the first one is desire This one is the most important. So the desire, if you just have the desire to change, to improve, to grow, that's already a sign that God's purifying your heart. That's great, because you go back to the second story I told you, that young teenage boy, there is, unfortunately, something wrong with his heart, because it's not clear that he wants to change. That's what hurt the father the most. I'll give you another similar example. All of our students, for example, in our school, they all sin. That's part of fallen human nature. But when I go to visit the classrooms, we talk about morality, we talk about God's teaching, about right and wrong. Now, some of the children, they visibly care. They're interested about what's right and wrong. They're concerned. Now, other children, they don't care. At least they don't show it. And we all know people in life who just don't care. So that's also part of fallen human nature. But if you care, we can work with that. Like I, as a priest, I can work with that. But if you don't, there's nothing I can do. And God can work with that. Father Jacques Philippe writes, "What more does God demand of us, if not this goodwill? What more could he demand of us, he who is a good and compassionate father, than to see his child desiring to love above all?" So if you desire, if you desire to grow, that's very pleasing to God. If you're falling into sin, but you're fighting and you do care, that's already really pleasing to God. So if that's in our heart, if anything that I've said today maybe has bothered you, that's a really wonderful sign. It means you care. And that's a starting point. Now let's bring it to fulfillment. The second way God renews our hearts is the sacraments. So one of the most powerful truths of the sacraments is that it's Jesus who's doing the work. So what would be more puriful, if I purify my heart or Jesus purifies my heart? Okay, that's clearly, we all know the answer. What is more powerful, when you pray at home or when you come to Mass? And the answer is the Mass, because when you pray at home, it's your prayer, you're united to Jesus if you're baptized. But when you come to Mass, it's Jesus' prayer. He's doing the praying, and we get to join our prayer to his. More powerful. At night, when you ask God for forgiveness of sins, you are asking him, you in union with Jesus. But when you go to confession, it's Jesus directly acting on your soul. Much better. I told you last year, Holy Thursday, I said, all you have to do is desire more grace when you receive the sacraments, and you will. Because part of the nature of the sacraments is it respects free will. So when two people come to communion, person A, person B, person A goes through the motions, receives Jesus physically, but no grace, because they're not that interested, not that open. Person B receives Jesus physically, but is hungering, and so receives all the grace that Jesus wants to give. All we have to do to receive more grace and so that we can grow is desire more. Number 3, the Rosary. So for 1,000 years, saints have sworn by this because the Rosary really humbles you. That's good for growth. And the Rosary is about contemplation. And contemplation means deep thinking, deep reflecting, and being in contact with Jesus' mysteries. And that kind of contemplation starts changing your heart. So everyone who prays the Rosary always grows. Always. You want to grow? Pray the Rosary. Number 4, signs of sincerity. Sometimes when a metal, let's say a rod, is bent out of shape, in order to make it straight, you have to bend it the other way in order to straighten it. And that's very much how our lives are. So if we've gone too far in a sinful direction in our life, sometimes in order to get back to virtue, you have to swing a bit further. You have to swing the pendulum the other way. So a few examples of this. Let's say someone has struggles with pornography. The minimum would be just, go to confession, and that's good, but it might not be enough to break it. So what you want to do is you want to do more. And so this person says, I'm going to get accountability software, I'm going to get Covenant Eyes so that my best friend will know everything I'm looking at on all my devices. They're going above and beyond to counteract, to build that virtue. Let's say we struggle with alcohol and we go above and beyond and say, I'm never going to drink except on a few occasions. just to gain that self-control. Let's say I talk too much, gossip, so many things come out of my mouth. Some people, when they're very serious, they will almost they'll practice a lot of silence to learn self-control. And the last example I can think of, I remember this young man, engaged. He said he would never go inside the house of his fiancée when they were alone. And I didn't understand it at the time, even though I was a priest. But what he was doing is he was going above and beyond because he knew his weakness. He wanted to make a sign of sincerity that he wants to have a really beautiful, pure relationship with his fiancée. So now, years later, I do understand it. Let's end now with a story about a man named Brian Walsh, and his story will encompass 3 of those 4 ways God renews our hearts. He was born in Michigan. Brian was talented captain of the high school basketball team, very popular, but he lived a double life. In front of the priest, in front of his parents, good Catholic. On the weekends, drunk, swearing, having sex. And after high school, he shocked everyone when he entered the seminary, and all the other seminarians had no idea how he got past the psychological exams. In seminaries, we typically have Spartan rooms, but Brian brought in wall-to-wall carpeting, an air conditioning unit, and he had parties in his room, and no one thought he would last the year. At the end of the first year, the seminarians had a 10-day silent retreat. And on the final day, the retreat master invited everyone to pray out loud. And Brian said, "Lord, I want to tell you that I'm really sorry, that I realize I've wasted my talents. I've wasted the gifts you've given me. I've abused the trust my parents have put in me. I've not been the person they thought I was. I've been a great sinner, and I want to change my life and turn my life over to you." The next year, Brian came back to the seminary, and he had changed. He sold his car, gave the money to the poor, sold all of his expensive, stylish clothing. But he was still the same Brian, same smile, same popularity, same sense of humor. But he had changed, and he started spending more time in the chapel. One day, after praying in front of the tabernacle, he was sitting on the floor. He went to the organist, and he said, "Tim, have you ever thought how wonderful it is that Jesus always remains with us in the most blessed sacrament?" And Tim apparently said, "No, I haven't." He knew it, but never thought about it the way Brian was. Brian loved serving the poor so much that eventually he left the seminary to go to Cambodia to help Mother Teresa's sisters as a lay volunteer. In 1975, when the Cambodian genocide started, people were being evacuated, especially foreigners. But he wrote a letter to his seminarian friends, his former seminarian friends. He said, "This time, if I am asked to leave, I will stay, because I feel called to mix my blood with the blood of Christ for the salvation of these people's souls." So he stayed behind, encouraging people, teaching catechism, going to daily mass secretly, all the while evading capture by the communists. And one day, after Mass, he was captured, brought outside the church, and executed at the age of 23. A year later, when a seminarian friend met St. Mother Teresa, and she found out that he knew Brian, she said, "Ah, you are very fortunate, because you are the classmate of a saint." So there is hope for all of us. We do struggle with our sins, but with, most importantly, desire, and then the sacraments, the Rosary, and signs of sincerity, God can renew our hearts, and we can become saints.